Okay, so we have Avraham Avinu on the scene, and so everything changes. The whole world changes. It starts off with Adam Arishon, and it goes to Noah, and now we have Abraham. And the Parsha begins in a really famous way. God says, go from your, I'm not sure I have the order here, right? Go from your birthplace, your father's house, your land, something like that, right? And basically change the world. I mean, that's the subtext. So the Ropshitzer says that Abraham has a problem because Abraham doesn't know how he's ever going to be able to do it because of the fact that he's from a really unrighteous place in the world, and his family is not great, right? His father is selling idols. By the way, there's a medrash that says that his father turned him into Nimrod to kill him. Yeah. So Terach is like a real question mark of a guy. Like toward the end of his life, apparently he got it together, but Abraham is not from the greatest family, and his father's house, right? So his father's house, his land, and what's the third one?
Father's house, land, and his Artzacha, Melaratcha, Beis Avicha.
Yeah.
His birthplace.
His birthplace. So basically, he's not in his own eyes tzaddik material. So how's he going to get this job done? And if he does think that he's tzaddik material, then who is he exactly? Is he really worthy if he thinks so highly of himself? And I think that this is like for me, just a piece of, I think, good advice for everyone, just in terms of conducting your own life, right? Is that if anyone ever tells you something, always evaluate who is saying it to you. Because it makes a big difference. If someone says a certain thing and if someone else says a certain thing, right? Yeah. Like, my dad quoted this joke, which is not funny at all, by the way. But I'm not interested in the humor of it. I'm interested actually in the teaching of it. So way before my time, there was a popular comedian named Georgie Jessel. Mm-hmm. Does that name ring a bell? Okay. I'm sure the only one in the room here knows that name.
Larry, you heard of him. Yeah.
Okay, so Georgie Jessel had a show. He was like a big celebrity in his day. And this I think was a radio joke. And he comes to his mom and he's wearing a captain's hat. And his mother says to him, "To me you're a captain, and to you you're a captain, but to a captain are you a captain?" So that possibly was funny 60 years ago, possibly. But the point that, the reason why my dad liked it was just because there's a lesson there, which is that, something like, you can be a big shot or you can act like a big shot, but in the eyes of a big shot, are you a big shot? That's the idea. So whether it's a compliment that you're receiving, who's giving you the compliment? If it's an insult that you're receiving, who's giving you the insult? If it's a critique, you've got to know who it's coming from. Okay, so with that in mind, just sort of like, not changing the subject, but just sort of like taking what I just said and tilting it maybe a few degrees. The Ropshitzer is saying that Avraham Avinu doesn't see himself as a tzaddik, and because he's very low in his eyes. And so I'm wondering what's going through the Ropshitzer's mind. So this is just me kind of freeballing here. Because the first Hasidic master that he's learning from is the Noam Elimelech, the Reb Melech, right? And he's the one if you want to look at the history of Hasidic thought, the Noam Elimelech is the one who really put the idea of the tzaddik as the centerpiece. So he's learning from the person who brought Hasidus to Poland. Remember, Poland is going to be the place where there's going to be the most Hasidim in the entire world by far. And this is the one who brings the idea of the tzaddik into Hasidic consciousness, and he's learning from the man himself who's like the Baal Shem Tov of Poland. But meanwhile, he's got, the Noam Elimelech has absolute superstars, some of the greatest souls in all of Jewish history as students. So they have to be asking themselves, am I a tzaddik? Like my Rebbe is teaching about what it means to be a tzaddik. But am I a tzaddik? If I'm thinking of myself as a tzaddik, I'm already not a tzaddik.
No.
Or, if he's the tzaddik, I'm never going to be on his level, so how can I be a tzaddik? So it's sort of like, you lose either way. If you think of yourself as a tzaddik, like him, and maybe you actually are, but one of the signs that you actually are is that you're not thinking of yourself in that way. It's like they say there are 36 hidden righteous people in the world. And my take on that is, if you think that you're one of them, you're already not. I mean, that's the greatest proof that you aren't.
Darn it. Oh. I really thought I was.
Hey, Marty, how are you?
I really thought I was.
So this is sort of what you would call like the tzaddik trap, or the conundrum of the tzaddik, which is that he's thinking to himself, Abraham Avinu is thinking to himself, only a tzaddik is actually capable of pulling this off. But but I'm not a tzaddik. So here's the question. How do you get out of this trap? How do you allow yourself to move forward without making this sort of like pronouncement on yourself which disqualifies you?
Someone tells it to you.
But the Tanya begins with, if anyone tells you that you're a tzaddik, don't believe them. Right?
So how?
How is it? You can quote it better than me, Dan. What does it say?
No, Itzi was saying that you should call yourself a Russia. You don't call yourself each other. It says, hey, keep a neck like a Russia. You should be in your eyes like a Russia.
Right.
You agree with that?
Well, that's in our generation. That's a complicated question, because you need good self-esteem. When they were dealing with it, they were a little tougher.
Well, but
I mean, remember, this is Russia.
Russia is not a Russia the way we think of a Russia.
Right. I mean, these people, those people, that generation, they were literally made out of iron. So it's not us. You know what I mean? We're the snowflakes. You know, we gotta build ourselves up. So Reb Shlomo has a teaching, just to amplify this, and it's one of my favorite teachings of his. He says that if you say to God, I'm desperate to build bridges between people's hearts, and I'm the one to do it, God says, don't call me, I'll call you. If you say, I'm desperate to build bridges between people's hearts, and I have no idea how to do it, God says, you're my man. So, to aspire to the highest and holiest things, but without having the answers. Because if you feel like you have the answers, there's a level of arrogance that disqualifies you. from being in contention. And the Ropshitzer goes deeper. He points out that, Abraham starts off as Avram. And by the way, there's actually a lav in the Torah, a thou shalt not. You're not allowed to refer to Abraham as Avram. He can only be called Abraham. Just like, by the way, you should know if someone has like a little bit of a, complicated past, let's put it that way, you're not really allowed to talk about it with them. If they want to bring it up with you, that's fine. But it's not appropriate to bring it up with them. So kind of in that spirit, we're not allowed to call Abraham Avram once his name got changed. Nonetheless, in the Torah right now, he's Avram. So what does Avram mean? So the Ropshitzer says it's like really it's an amazing name. Av, this is getting now Kabbalistic. Av is spelled Aleph Beis. Now the gematria of Aleph Beis is 3. And for those of you who are familiar with the 10 Sfirot, you have the upper 3 Sfirot and the lower 7 Sfirot. And when this cosmic event called Shviras HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels, happened in the beginning of creation, the top 3 Sfirot were not damaged or broken at all. That remained pure light. It's just the bottom 7 that were broken. Very important piece of information that the Pischei Sharm brings down. Actually, an essential piece of information. So what is Avram? The first 2 letters of Avram's name add up to 3, and that's a reference to the highest, holiest light that was never broken. The top 3 Sfirot. And what does Ram mean? Ram means most high. So Avram, actually that name means the highest light in the universe. So who was Avram? Avram was the one who wanted to bring down this highest, holiest light. But in his own eyes, he didn't think that he was capable because he didn't see himself as a tzaddik. And again, if he saw himself as a tzaddik, then he wasn't the one to be able to bring it down. So how do you get out of it? So listen to what the Ropshitzer says. He's going to solve this problem for all of us, by the way. Okay? He says that God's mercy is absolutely endless. And don't predicate it on your own righteousness or lack of righteousness. Just look to God's unbelievable, unlimited chesed and rachmanos. And if you just focus on that, you realize that God is capable of giving his light and his success to anyone who chooses, anyone who he chooses. And it doesn't have to be based on any merits that you have necessarily. You can, in fact, be from a crummy family, and in fact be from a crummy land. And still God's rachmanis, his mercy, his chesed, is so unlimited that he can give it to anyone who he wants. You see, now this psychologically is very, very deep. And again, we're not just talking about Abraham, we're talking about all of us, right? Humility is a really tricky proposition, because humility can, if it's like just a tiny bit off, can turn into a form of narcissism. And I'll explain what I mean by that. let's say a person is actually quite sincere, and they say, you know something, I'm not worthy. But I'm not just saying I'm not worthy, I'm genuinely not worthy. But they're just so inwardly thinking that just by virtue of the fact that they're thinking of themselves so much, that in and of itself is a form of narcissism. Even though they're well-intentioned, if they're doing it too much, why are you thinking about yourself so much? That in itself is problematic. I understand that you're coming from a good place, but if there's a little too much inward looking, a little too much navel gazing or self-fascination, that in and of itself is a disqualifying factor, even though there's a sincere thread to it. So the beautiful part of what the Ropshitzer is saying, the liberating thing psychologically, is to turn your glance from inward, which is I'm not worthy, I'm low, which could be true and could be a little bit holy even, and just to turn it outward and say, God, your Rahmanis, your kindness is so infinite, you can do anything, you can bestow success on anyone. And that turning of your glance from inward, although obviously we have to account for our deeds and explore our intentions. I mean, that is an appropriate dimension, but not too much, not too much. And to keep it outwardly fixed on God is the solution. Because now, I don't have to be a tzaddik, because God can do anything. So I don't have to come to this, I don't have to be trapped between these two poles. Only a tzaddik can accomplish this, but if I think of myself as a tzaddik, then I'm not a tzaddik, and infinite regression. How do I escape that? By just looking to God in His infinite kindness. Now, it's interesting because there was a revolution in Hasidus, and it happened around the time of the Choz of Lublin. Now, remember, the Choz of Lublin is also one of the top students of the Reb Melech, right? The Noam Elimelech, who's also the Ropshitzer's first teacher, right, of Chassidus. So the Noam Elimelech sort of enshrines in his Sefer the idea of the tzaddik, but in terms of like real life action, the one who really just explodes it is the Choz of Lublin, who the whole world is coming to see the Choz of Lublin as the tzaddik. I heard from Rabbi Beryl Wine that it got to the point where people were even bringing their cows to the Choz of Lublin for blessings, right? The story is told there was a non-Hasidic Rav of Lublin who was not a Hasid at all, and he saw the Choz of Lublin as sort of this bit of an upstart in his community, who was attracting all these people. And the Choz, wanted to have good relations with him, and it seemed like the Rav of the town was not happy with the Choz, so the Choz is what do you want me to do? They keep on coming to me. And so the Rav says, tell everybody that you're not a tzaddik. It's a famous story, by the way. So the Choz of Lublin stood in front of all the people and he said, I'm not a tzaddik. And everyone said, what a tzaddik! And so more people came. And then the Rav of the town was even more annoyed. And the Choz said, what do you want me to do? And he said, go back and tell them you're really not a tzaddik. So he said, I'm really not a tzaddik. And they were like, hey, you're an even bigger tzaddik than we thought. So the Choza has a best friend, really, a number one person known as the Yid Kodesh. And the Yid Kodesh, like, just checks out the scene in Lublin with like people bringing their cows to the tzaddik, and he makes what's called a counter-revolution within the revolution of Chassidus. And he says, you know what? We're just leaving all this tzaddik business behind. We're just going to learn, and we're going to be real, and de-emphasizing the whole idea of the tzaddik as a miracle maker. And they just so what I'm trying to do is just give you kind of like a background of how an overview of how these giant souls were dealing with this issue of being a tzaddik or not being a tzaddik, or what's a tzaddik and what does that mean to me or to the people around me. And so that was another approach, which then becomes sort of like amplified and really truly embodied with the Kotzker Rebbe, who's now going to be the student of the Yid Kodesh, who makes that initial break. And then he really emphasizes this idea of, not only of not kind of rejecting the idea of the tzaddik, although, as it was at that point anyway, but also just rejecting the idea of yichus. So yichus means that you're from a line of rabbis, and if you look at the family trees of Rebbes, all the Rebbes' families are marrying with each other. They're like, if you're related to one Hasidic master, you're probably related to 8 Hasidic masters, because they were all like kind of taking yichus, like, what family line you were from, very seriously. And there, by the way, there's something to it. It's like holy blood. That's not a joke. How much you emphasize it is something else, but there's actually something to it. So famously, the Kotzker Rebbe said to someone who kind of, came up to him and wanted a blessing or just kind of wanted to interact with him, and this person kind of felt like he needs to give his credentials, to be taken seriously by the Kotzker Rebbe. And so he introduces himself as the son of this person and the grandson of this person. And the Kotzker Rebbe was like, who are you? I couldn't be less interested in who your father is and who your grandfather is. They refer to that as yichus atzmo, which means that you yourself have to earn that reputation. So now the Ropshitzer says something unbelievable, which is that when you read the pasuk, the opening line of LECHA, God says, go from your birthplace, your father's house, and your family, or whatever it is. And it sounds like that's the beginning, just narratively, just in terms of the writing of the storytelling of the Parsha. It's starting with this command from God. Now, look at this genius. Look at this, the genius of the Ropshitzer. He says, no, that's not actually what's going on in terms of the narrative. First it begins, this is in the white fire, before we get to Lech Lecha, the white fire before that is Avraham saying, I'm not worthy. I'm from a crummy family. I'm from a crummy region. The house of my father's no good. And God picks up on the thoughts of what's going on in the heart of Abraham. And God responds to Abraham's thinking and says, Go from your father's house. Go from your land. Do you understand? It's the opening pasuk of Lech Lecha is not the beginning of the story. It's not a command from God that then triggers an action. The opening pasuk of Lech Lecha is a response that God is giving to Abraham's thoughts about his own lowness. That's like a head spinner. Do you get it? And how is he to leave all of these inhibitions stopping him behind? By realizing that God can do absolutely anything. That if God has Rahman, that God's Rahmanis, God's Chesed is so great. Don't worry about you. Don't worry about where you're holding, right? Whenever I have a thought about myself, something, maybe I did something good or something like that, and I wonder, maybe that was good or something like that. I always hear a voice like right after in my head, which is, God keeps the accounts. Just that's God's business. That's not your business. God will decide. Just keep moving. I'll say one more thing. At the time of Abraham, society was really a mess. People were genuinely out for themselves. Genuinely out for themselves in a pretty barbaric way. Child sacrifice was huge. Can you imagine, just to make some money, you were willing to take your baby and literally sacrifice it, literally kill your own child just to get whatever blessing that you want. I mean, the world was in a horrific place. And this idea of kindness was completely a revolutionary idea. Kindness, just as a concept, was revolutionary. Now, I mentioned earlier this idea of Shviras HaKelim. Basically what happened was this great light came into the world, and there were these vessels to hold the light. We call them, at this point in creation, the Sphirot. But the Sphirot were not connected with each other. Each was an individual separate entity. And the light that came down shattered all of them, because none of them were capable of holding the light. And then God reconstituted these vessels, the Sphirot, but this time each one was attached to each other. And they were able to share the light. And because they were sharing the burden with each other, they were able to hold the light. Because of this unity that took place that wasn't there initially. So what I want to say is, now we know that Abraham is coming to fix the entire world. So what I want to say is like this, that when you do kindness for other people, when you stop just dwelling on yourself all the time, and you outwardly look at God and just the fact that God is kind and can do anything, and you look at each other and each other's needs and things like that, what happens is you start to bring people together. And when people come together, that's like this rectification of the vessels smashing at the beginning of creation. In other words, that idea that the vessels came together and now could hold the light because they were sharing the light. Avraham Avinu, through the vehicle of kindness, is recreating the vessels coming together by building community. And now when all people are together and they're sharing each other's burdens and emotional loads and whatever it is, all of a sudden you have in human form the ultimate vessel, the ultimate kli, which can hold the light of redemption.
Right,